fair winds in the following cities. We're looking forward to this great presentation. So with that, a round of applause for Colonel Jim Handura.
All right, how we doing? Doing okay? Jim, good to see you back there. Good to see you. So we got some familiar faces, some new ones. I'm going to mention the term core. And I know we got former Marine. How many former Marines we got in here? We got a few former Marines. So don't be confused, right? When I talk core, a short-term or shorthand version of the Corps of Engineers. Sometimes you've heard us as the Corps or USACE or U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So not to confuse folks, but I may slip into some shorthand in the Corps. I'm talking about the other Corps, Mike, not the Marine Corps. So, hey, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, glad to be here tonight. Jim Handura, South Pacific Division Commander. I've got a couple teammates here to keep me honest. My Chief of Staff, Household 6, Julie, my lovely wife is here. Right, keeping things straight. Mr. Brian Camasato is with us. He's one of two SES's, Senior Executive Service personnel assigned to the division, General Officer Equivalent. I've got Sarah Christensen, Captain Sarah Christensen, who's changing out in a couple weeks, right? Going to the Captain's Career Course at Fort Leonard Wood to train her to be a company commander. So she'll go there for about, 6-8 months, and then on to be a company commander, one of the best jobs in the Army. I'm sure, same thing with Marine Corps, right? Like being a company commander. And then we've got Dylan Allen is new, just came to us, right? Where'd you come from? Fort Carson. So he was a platoon leader, executive officer, and so he'll come spend a year with us, and then he too will go to the Cap's Career Course, so about a year turn on it. They get a steady diet of the Corps of Engineers, fast and furious for a year. So with that, I'm going to start out and one other point. So this year it's a big event for the Army and for the Corps of Engineers, right? 250th birthday for the Army and the Corps of Engineers. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides about the Corps of Engineers throughout the history of the United States. But let me start we're going to talk a little history, we'll talk a little mission, and we'll dial it in to the Bay Area and some of the things we're doing in the local area as well as California and this region as we go through the presentation. Go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the slide we show that on behalf of our Chief of Engineers, who's in DC, Lieutenant General Butch Graham, and this is the priorities for the Corps of Engineers. You also see the mission statement and the tagline at the bottom. But I want to focus on the right side over there. The really key 3 points, right? Deliver, innovate, and focus. So for us, it's deliver. The Army and the nation are counting on us to deliver the important work we've been charged to do. Innovate for tomorrow. We've got to continue to improve and stay ahead of change. And we know we've got to keep innovating. And then thirdly, we got to focus on our people. People always, right? Focus on our people, take care of our people, and that includes our partnerships. And we'll talk about that in a couple slides, but we can't get anything done as a Corps of Engineers without our partnerships. That's local, state, federal, tribal, nonprofits, academia, and industry. And then the bottom line for us is winning. So winning for the Corps of Engineers, the definition of winning for us is safely delivering quality projects on schedule and within budget. Right? That's our bottom line. That's our bottom line because folks are counting on us. Next slide. Okay, talk a little bit about the history. So the history of the nation is the history of the Corps of Engineers. Founded in 16 June 1775, 2 days after the Continental Army was founded. On this day, the commander of the Continental Army, General Washington, appointed the first Chief of Engineers, Colonel Richard Gridley, first Chief of Engineers, Colonel Richard Gridley. Army engineers have served in every armed conflict our nation has been involved in. Army engineers played a crucial role in the growth of the young republic, surveying routes for canals and railroads, and serving as explorers, surveyors, and map makers who opened the American West. Our legacy includes design and construction of some of the iconic Washington projects you've probably seen. Washington Monument, U.S. Capitol Dome, the Library of Congress, and the Pentagon, as well as the Lincoln Memorial. Our portfolio includes completion of the Panama Canal, regionally transformative dams such as the Bonneville Dam and the Columbia River, coastal storm risk reduction systems, and inland waterway navigation features. Much of the infrastructure built by the Corps in the 1930s through the 60s is still in use today. The Corps continues to tackle the greatest engineering challenges facing the nation, including the lower right-hand side there, that's, Mike, you mentioned it, the completion of the $14 billion Greater New Orleans Hurricane Storm Damage Risk Reduction System. That's a mouthful. HSDRS is the short title of that. And that was reduced risk for the devastating floods that followed Katrina. So that work was done post-Katrina to better lower risk for the city of New Orleans. And then more recently, not depicted on this slide, and we've got a slide later we'll show it, is the Corps of Engineers was there for the tragedy at the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, along with our Coast Guard partners. Those two agencies were the ones charged with opening federal channel and with removing debris from the channel to be able to get commerce flowing again. Next slide. So we'll walk through a little timeline here of some key events in the Corps of Engineers history, and what I want to tell you about is the authorities that Congress has been granted to the Corps of Engineers throughout the years. So the 1812 military programs, one of the Corps of Engineers' earliest missions was the construction of coastal forts that proved valuable during the War of 1812. You may have heard of one such as Fort McHenry. This was the beginning of the Corps of Engineers' role in military construction. In 1824, a congressional act, the Rivers and Harbors Act and General Survey, the Congress charged the Corps of Engineers with improving navigation on the Ohio and Mississippi rivers and initiated the Corps' permanent civil works mission. During the 19th century, much of the Corps of Engineers navigation would involve snack boats, such as the one depicted here that remove obstacles on the waterways. Also about this time, we started doing work on the Sacramento River as part of the debris commissions. In 1882, disaster response following massive flooding in the Mississippi River area, Congress formally tasked the Corps of Engineers with a rapid emergency response mission. Before that, we had done localized response, but this was now tasked on a broader scale. In 1925, hydropower. The Corps of Engineers constructed the first federally funded hydroelectric facility, Wilson Dam, completed in Muscle Shoals on the Tennessee River. Originally intended to power wartime munitions factories, and at the time of completion, it was one of the largest dams in the world. Projects like that set the precedence for using infrastructure as part of the national economic recovery during the New Deal and later federally multi-purpose resource development projects. That dam was later turned over to Tennessee Valley Authority. In 1936, National Flood Control Act 1936. Following major flooding in the Ohio and tributaries, Congress empowered the Corps of Engineers to build flood control projects in partnership with states and localities as a proper activity of the federal government. In 1944 Flood Control Act, Congress authorized the Corps to develop recreational facilities on USACE projects. Today, more than 400 USACE projects host an annual 260 million annual visitors. 260 million annual visitors at our parks. That rivals the National Park Service. 1970s, major regulatory expansion, passage of significant environmental legislation, including the National Environmental Policy Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act. And that required the Corps of Engineers to greatly expand our environmental review and permitting programs. 1988, base alignment and closure. At the end of the Cold War, the Army began to consolidate installations and dispose of some of our unneeded property. So the BRAC generated also its own demands as we consolidated units on legacy facilities and installations. There were 5 rounds of BRAC between 1988 and 2011. The Corps of Engineers served as a project manager for building new facilities on those gaining posts, which saw a significant expanse under the 2005 BRAC funding. Overall, the Corps of Engineers managed over $11 billion program consisting of 274 military construction projects, representing the Army's largest transformation since World War II. In 2001, contingency operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. USACE responded to the 9/11 attacks with structural assessments, power restoration, and debris removal, and focused on increasing the security of infrastructure across the nation. When the U.S. entered the global war on terror, both in Afghanistan and Iraq, the Corps of Engineers established new overseas districts and divisions to help those countries rebuild their shattered infrastructure. In 2007, dam and levee safety failures in the levee system protecting New Orleans during Hurricanes Katrina in 2005 led to a growing awareness of the value of our infrastructure and one of the most complex risk analysis carried out by the Corps of Engineers as an interagency task force. The Corps of Engineers became one of the world leaders in using risk to better make decisions on how to invest in our aging portfolio. 2020, COVID response. The Corps of Engineers was tasked by FEMA to construct alternate care facilities, a new mission area for us. And then lastly, 2024, as depicted on the slide, is the Francis Scott Key tragedy, where the Corps of Engineers and the Coast Guard were tasked with opening the federal channel and debris removal. Go to the next slide. Talk a little bit about the headquarters leadership. So about 37,000 strong across the Corps of Engineers, 37,000 strong, give or take. That is about 90% Department Army civilians, and about 10% of that is military officers, about 800 military officers and NCOs. Led by Lieutenant General Butch Graham, who's the Chief of Engineers, and he's got, you can see here, general officers, he's got senior executive service personnel, and those are general officer equivalents, tier 2 SESs up in the headquarters, overseeing a diverse mission set. Next slide. All right, now we're gonna start to zoom in. So the next level down is the major subordinate commands, of which the South Pacific Division is one of those, as you see. 9 of those, you see the areas of operation, generally organized along watersheds, generally. And we'll get a little more into the detail on the South Pacific one here in a little bit. Those are commanded by senior officers, colonels, or general officers, typically 1 to 2 SESs per MSC. And those 9 regions oversee a combined total of 44 districts. So we've got 44 districts across the nation and the world commanded by this next level of leadership. All right, next slide. Okay. This slide here just shows you a diverse mission set. We've got 7 main mission areas, right? Military programs, civil works, contingency operations, interagency and international support, geospatial support, research and development, and real estate. And so the South Pacific Division does most of those. We do a little bit of research and development on our own. We also work with Engineering Research Development Center, which is located in Vicksburg. And we rely on our Army Geospatial Command to help us with the geospatial. So we do most of those in-house within the South Pacific Division. And other ones we borrow capacity and expertise from others within the USACE enterprise. Next slide. Okay, 2 points on this slide. It's to show you the program load. This program of the Corps of Engineers is it's a cumulative program, about $91 billion plus. Cumulative program, not an annual program. Cumulative. And you see the mission lines there, right? We've got disaster response, we've got civil works, we've got military construction. The other thing I want to show is across the top, the 3 patches, we'll call them patches. That's to show that the Chief of Engineers, Lieutenant General Graham, has 3 hats. So start from the left, he's the commander of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which for some will realize it's called a direct reporting unit. That means he reports directly to the Chief of Staff of the Army, direct reporting unit. The second one in the middle, he's the Chief of Engineers for the Army staff. And then the third hat on the right is the Chief of Branch for the Engineer Regiment. And so he wears 3 hats simultaneously, and I used to be his Chief of Staff. And so sometimes that could be a challenge because you don't know, you could be talking about 3 different areas at once. It could be designated in one area, and so it's important just to understand the scope and scale and the magnitude of that position. The Chief of Engineers is a 4-year position, and like I said, that's a Lieutenant General position, but it's a 4-year tour. And General Graham took over in September last year from Lieutenant General Scott Spellman, and he's on his 4-year journey now. Next slide. Okay, we'll start to zoom in on the South Pacific Division. This is our vision and mission. To achieve this mission, we must continue to work with communities and partners differently than we have in the past. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides. Next slide. This is the SPD, South Pacific Division, area of responsibility. We cover 10 western states. The colors on that map, once again, correspond to watersheds. Okay, watersheds. we actually have, Mike, you'll appreciate this, we have actually 3 different AOR boundaries, just to make it, confusing, right? So we have a civil works boundary, we have a military construction boundary, and we have a regulatory boundary. And so we got to kind of, make sure we're not confusing ourselves sometimes, but it just kind of paints the picture of the complexity of what we do. 3 different boundaries, but 10 Western states. So the left-hand side, those are the folks based out of San Francisco. So our headquarters is down the street here at the Burton Federal Building, and that's our division headquarters. And so you see there, we've got a commander, deputy commander, and then 2 senior executive services. Once again, Mr. Brian Comisato is here tonight. He's our regional business director, and he oversees our resource management functions, our engineering and construction functions, and what else, Brian? Business management. So our data analytics, our business intelligence, and that's Brian. And then Ms. Tamara Eller is our programs director. So she's overseeing civil works program, military program, navigation, permitting, and the like. And so that's the set on the left. And then we've got a staff of about 90 personnel that are a mix of attorneys and project managers and engineers and so forth. That's within the SBD headquarters. On the right-hand side, that's our subordinate units. So we've got 4 districts within the region. We'll start at the bottom, the home team, right? San Francisco district. So led by Lieutenant Colonel Shabesta. He's actually changing command next week. Change command next week. It's a 2-year tour for our 05 commanders. And so Lieutenant Colonel Virginia Brickner, it will be taken over next week on the Tuesday 10th at the Bay Model. Anybody been to the Bay Model? Raise your hand, please. If you haven't, go check out the Bay Model in Sausalito. Beautiful spot. So we'll do the change command next week. His senior civilian, so we're paired up, that's the command team, is the DPM, which is the Deputy for Project and Program Management. So that's a GS-15, GS General Schedule. That's the highest rank you can go without becoming a SCS. So General Schedule 15 is the highest civilian rank on the GS or General Schedule scale. So Tommy Williams. Next up the list is LA District Colonel Baker, 06 Commander. 06 Commander. 06 Commanders typically do a 3-year tour in the Corps of Engineers. 3-year tour for 06 Commanders. His DPM is Miss Kim Thomas. Next up is Sacramento District Colonel Caldwell, Beth Salyers on his DPM, and then lastly Albuquerque at the top, and Jake Pauley. And so what this represents too is the blend of the military that brings military, we say commander-led civilian-run organization, right? Commanders bring the military mindset, the military planning factor, that bias for action, and our civilians bring the continuity leadership and that expertise, right? Because the military personnel change out, but our civilians are the ones with the continuity, with the connective tissues, with those long-term partnerships. And so it's a recipe that works well for the Corps of Engineers. All right, next slide. Okay, this, as an engineering outfit, we got to show some facts, right? I mean, this is kind of the obligatory. This is just the value we bring to the nation. And this is something we typically talk to our members of Congress about, other members of the public, just to get a sense of the snapshot there, right? We covered, like I said, 10 Western states, about 55 million citizens in those areas, and you can see the scope and scale of the programs listed here. All right, next slide. So we'll start out in the civil works. We'll talk a little bit about this area. It's diverse and wide-ranging. We range everything from very large projects to small-scale projects. And these projects have sometimes multi-benefits: flood risk reduction, ecosystem restoration, navigation, recreation, and in some cases, water supply. And so, upper left-hand corner, Jim Hausner, as you know, important to us is navigation, right? And we're going to, another slide, we'll talk about navigation, but navigation. And so that is the drift snagging vessel Raccoon. And that vessel and the Dillard are the 2 vessels stationed at the Bay Model in Sausalito. And their main job is to keep the waterways open. Waterways open. Shoreline project is a little south of here. That's a flood risk management project. Pajaro levees are down in the Watsonville area. That's a flood risk management project. In 2023, we'll talk a little bit later, that community had a breach in some levees and it flooded the town. So we did the repair work, working with the California Department of Water Resources, Cal OES, and this is now the next ground to strengthen some levees to make them more resilient. And then Lake Sonoma Visitor Center, beautiful spot if you get a chance to go up there. But that's just a snapshot of the many projects across our region with the civil works portfolio. Next slide. Okay, innovation. So Engineering Research Development Center is our nucleus for research and development. They're located in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and they have a constellation of labs throughout the country. And why I'm telling you that is we partner with them on innovation. So innovation, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the things that we got to do to stay ahead of things, right? And so here's just a couple examples within the South Pacific Division, right? So data-informed decision making. We spend a lot of time on using our schedules, using our data to be able to make decisions off of, right? And that's for resources, that's looking at risk. In fact, Mr. Comisato and I were talking recently, we're looking at ways now to see how we can employ AI to help us, right? In some cases, right? To help with routine tasks, to help with analytical computation. But that's also things we do with modeling, right? We do modeling with what we call digital modeling. If you want to see an example of physical model, go up to the Bay model. Literally, that's a physical model. It's a scale model of the watershed in California. But those are just some of the things we're looking at. Data-driven decision-making is what we're looking at. How do we leverage artificial intelligence and other means? Forecast-informed reservoir operations. So that is, we partnered with academia, federal, state, and local agencies, and that is to apply advanced weather and stream flow forecasts to modify our reservoir operations in our area. And so there's an opportunity to lower flood risk, but improve water availability, right? So in some cases, we can hold water a little longer in some of our reservoirs, which allows for water supply, groundwater recharge. And so we did a pilot project a couple years ago at Lake Mendocino. On that project, we yielded about 19% increase in water supply. And that water is critical to the local communities that were in the midst of the third year of a drought. So we've taken that, we're looking at other opportunities where we can apply that model. Right now we're looking at Santa Ana River down in Southern California, as well as Prado Dam, and also around Sacramento area, Yuba, Feather River basins. And we've also looked at across the portfolio within our enterprise, but also in the region, to see what other areas where we can apply that forecast-informed reservoir operations. Because our dams are operated, we use a thing called water control manual. And the water control manual tells you, I've got so much water behind the dam, I have a rain forecast coming, I need to have this much flood control space. And so what we want to do is take the technology, apply that in the future, and see maybe we can hold water a little longer, be a little more precise. So that's some of the things we're doing over the next few years as we update water control manuals. And then let me talk just mainly on the Bay model. So get a chance, go up to Sausalito, beautiful on the water up there, and we're looking for opportunities to see what else we can house at the Bay model. So we're looking to see maybe there's STEM academies, we're looking at work with local school districts and others to see what are some of those opportunities to maybe bring some folks in there because we've got space up there. And so that's, I think, an ongoing conversation that we continue to have with that area. Dredge placement is a key for us. It's taking that dredge material and let's create land with it. So we have a goal by 2030 to take 70% of our dredge material and use that for beneficial use. And beneficial use means creating land mass. And so there are areas around the Bay, up in Hamilton is one of them, where we can take that material, if it's clean, and we can build marsh, and we can rebuild marsh. And that's helpful for wave action and tidal influences and sea level rise and so forth. So we're spending a lot of time talking about how we place material. We've also talked about looking at trying to follow the individual grains of sediment and getting a better idea of where that goes. And so we've got some discussions with academia about what we can do to model that. So when you do dump that dredge, that you know it's going to go where it needs to go, right? Based on current and tides and so forth. So a lot of work looking at that. And then the coastal hazard warning system is something we're looking at the West Coast, just knitting together with scripts, with other academia, with partner agencies, just to get a better sense of hazard warning on the West Coast and tidal influence factors, for sure. And then engineering with nature, the South Pacific Division is a is one of the areas where we're looking at approving ground. So YOLO bypass, I don't know if folks ever heard that term, YOLO bypass. So right near Sacramento is a floodway that the Corps of Engineers had a hand in constructing many years ago, using basically the nature-based features to build a channel floodwater around Sacramento, right, as a pressure relief valve. And so we're always looking for new ways to leverage engineering with nature instead of engineering against nature, as I like to say. So how can we do that? And so just a couple ways, as you see here, where we're trying to use innovation. All right, Jim Hausner, navigation. All right, near or dear. So we have coastal navigation. Even though we have some projects that extend 80 plus miles inland, all our navigation is coastal navigation. And so, for example, San Francisco District has over 600 miles of coastline. Los Angeles District has about 420 miles of coastline. And, you know, as we know, ports are one of the economic engines of the West Coast, as well as a strategic port to national defense, right? And so one of the things is making sure commerce is able to flow, Navy vessels down in San Diego are able to move, and the like. And so keeping the federal channels open is one of the jobs we look at. And so we rely on San Francisco District and our LA District to oversee that. And we use contracted dredges. We also have some Corps of Engineers dredges within our fleet. One on the West Coast or two on the West Coast, and then some on Mississippi River and some East Coast. So a vital mission. We do that in partnership with many agencies. CMAC, we do that with U.S. Coast Guard, we do that with the ports, we do that with the Pilots Association and others. And so that, once again, is just an example of a multi-agency coordination daily, right, to make sure we get these waterways open. Next slide. Okay, talk a little bit about our military programs, military partners and agencies. We typically execute about $1 billion a year in construction for the military partners and interagency and international support within the South Pacific region. For military construction, mainly Air Force and Army installations and Army reserves in the area. We also do work for Department of Veterans Affairs and Department of Homeland Security along the southwest border. And so right now, we've got about $4.9 billion in the Department of Veterans Affairs portfolio alone, and that's major construction projects. And that accounts for about 46% of the total enterprise-wide projects for the Corps of Engineers. So South Pacific Division, almost half of the portfolio of the Veterans Administration is with the South Pacific Division, and that's major construction, over $100 million. And so we've got approximately 4 projects in construction, remaining 5 are in design or pre-design. And about a year ago, we just opened with our VA partners, Stockton, a community-based outpatient clinic. So we're real proud of that. That's, you know, servicing a lot of veterans in the Central Valley, and we've got more to come. We're doing work at the San Francisco VA campus. We're doing work down in Long Beach. We're also doing work down in San Diego. So multiple locations. All right, next slide. Partnering. So the Corps of Engineers, as I mentioned earlier, we don't do anything without our partners, right? And that's federal, state, local, tribal, industry, academia, and more. And so on the left-hand side, it's just a small snapshot of the many partners we work with. The pictures are an examples recently of some celebrations with our partners. And this just shows what can happen when we work together. Next slide. Okay. Emergency management, I want to talk a little bit about authorities. We've got 2 main authorities with the Corps of Engineers. The first one is Public Law 8499, also known as Flood Control and Coastal Emergencies. Okay? And the second is Stafford Act. So we'll start out with flood fight or flood control. So as you may remember, in 2023, we had a series of atmospheric rivers that came through this area that's statewide, right? Historic rain and flooding, and across the state, and snow levels in the Sierras. In the spring and early summer, before temperatures warmed up and the big melt started, the snowpack was approximately 3 times reservoir capacity across the state. So the snow melt was successfully managed through operations of the state's dams and reservoirs, as well as the Corps of Engineers reservoirs, in coordination using, as said earlier, with the water control manuals. We also did, as you see on the slide here, we provided technical assistance to certain areas within the state of California We also provided flood fight materials to local municipalities, and those are things such as sandbags and other portable barriers where they can bring in and help to arrest the floodwaters. All right, next slide. Okay, the other emergency authority we have is part of the National Response Framework. Under that framework, and that's multiple agencies, right? That's FEMA, that's Department of Energy, that's the Corps of Engineers, that's the Coast Guard, and the like. National Response Framework is a framework of responses. So the Corps of Engineers is responsible for Emergency Support Function 3, which we're the primary on that one. So that's Public Works and Engineering. And so we maintain 4 standing ESF3 teams. On the left side, there's four teams: temporary power, debris management, infrastructure assessment, and temporary housing. And those teams can be called on a short notice to go deploy. And we've deployed them, whether it be in October last year in the Mexico wildfires. We had teams move out to the Albuquerque area. We've had folks you've read on the East Coast, the tragic suffering in North Carolina, post-storm recovery. We've got folks there that have been deployed. We've also got folks down in LA with the January 2025 wildfires, both in the Eaton Fire, the Alton-Tadena area, and the Pacific Palisades. And so, in fact, down in the LA area, we're doing the private property debris removal, about 10,000 parcels of property. We're about 70% complete on that. And once we get done with that, we turn that right of entry back to the county and what we call final sign-off, and then the county gets it back to the homeowner, and the homeowner can begin to rebuild that rebuilding process. So, but that's just an example of the teams. And then the last team on the bottom is Urban Search and Rescue, and that one is managed out of South Pacific Division. That is a group of about 30 to 40 structural engineers that are deployed around the globe with FEMA, typically, or at the behest of the federal government to go into areas where there's been structural collapse. And so you may have remembered about the condo collapse in Miami area, right, a couple years ago. We sent folks down there to be part of the local, state, and federal task force to make an assessment on safety for first responders to be able to get into those areas. And we had folks, I was out recently down at Mountain View, down at the NASA facility. We have a training area down there where we recently had a class. We were bringing in some folks from agencies. So we had fire agencies, we had Corps of Engineers folks there, and they were doing training on how to be a part of that structural urban search and rescue team. And so talking to some of the instructors down there, those instructors on the Corps side had been at the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma at the bombing. They were there afterwards, right, working through that, working with the first responders. They were there on 9/11 when the Twin Towers were attacked. And so just an example, once again, of the global scope and scale of our emergency response missions. All right, let's see what we got next. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. Happy to take questions. I don't know how we're looking at time, Mike, but yeah, so.
Okay, what we'd like to do is, so we can get the questions on film. Anybody has a question, raise your hand. I'll pass the microphone to you. Oh, perfect.
First of all, thank you so much for the presentation.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. I have a question. I'm not sure whether it falls under your purview or not. It's about the aquifers in California. Obviously, with our drought initiatives and things like that, we're trying to combat that.
Right.
Can you update us on what that status is like, and if they are actually refilling and things like that? Or, I mean, obviously, we're still in a drought.
Right. Yeah, I can only say that the lead on that would be the California Department of Water Resources. They would be the lead on that question. We work very closely with California DWR. So if there's a case where actually some of our dams and reservoirs, where there's an opportunity in some cases to do some raising of our levees or our dams, and we talked earlier about modifying our water control maintenance to hold water longer, that would be our contribution to help and recharge the aquifer. So we're looking at facilities, even in the LA area, where we're looking at, hey, can we hold water a little longer on some of those dams and then release it slower? And that's in coordination with California Department of Water Resources and the local water authority. So we've got just a part to play in that. That's a better question for DWR, California Department of Water Resources, but we work very closely with them. on efforts such as these. And so when Congress, in some cases, we have the authority we get from Congress on the civil works side of the House is typically every 2 years, we get what we call a Water Resource Development Act, WRDA. And so typically every 2 years, Congress enacts this WRDA, and WRDA gives us authority to do new things. So one of the areas that we're getting into now is water supply more, and also manage aquifer recharge. And so I don't have the direct answer because it's not, in my purview per se, but I can say that we're working very closely with, like I said, state agencies, local agencies, where appropriate, and looking at some of our projects to say, what can we do to help with putting more water into the aquifer to help recharge, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Were you, your office, involved in the dam removals, Klamath River, Oregon, California border, and the proposed removal of, I think it's called Potter Dam?
Yeah, so we weren't.
PG&E.
Yeah, we weren't part of that. So no, we weren't part of that. That I think was, I don't want to speculate, but probably state agencies. I don't know if some of those aren't. I don't think those are Corps of Engineers dams. So yeah, I'm familiar with them. In some cases, there's talk about removing dams to allow fish passage and other things, but those were non-USACE dams, if that makes sense.
Perhaps you can expand a little bit about the civilian role.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking about the days when Steve Browning and Steve Stockton were the SCSers,
Yeah.
and they both served in Baghdad.
Yeah.
And I look at Al Panisha and how he served, and Tamber
Yeah.
served as well as the various folks who respond to these emergencies.
Right.
95% are civilians,
Right.
and they got a day job, and they leave family and home to go either overseas to a war zone
Right.
or locally. And perhaps you can, I think that's the greatest strength the Corps has, and maybe
Yeah.
you can talk a little more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Jim, great point. So that's one of the benefits of the Corps on the civilian side is, you get to do your day job, as Jim said. You could be a biologist, an attorney, a project manager, an engineer, and then you can sign up for these response teams, right? And you can go be on a debris mission. And so that's what we've done down in Southern California. We leverage the entire USACE enterprise. We've got about 300 plus civilian employees from across the enterprise down there for that wildfire mission and the debris mission. And those folks come typically 45 days to 60 days, could go a little longer. And that gives them an opportunity to go see that. And I think to Jim's point, when they come back, it just makes them a well-rounded employee. And so those are, and I can tell you, it hits home. So I've been down to the LA fires probably 3 or 4 times. I was down there in January before they were 100% contained. Been back since a few times. And so we've got some teammates down there that are running that operation, but I'm very well connected in, and my LA district is part of that, helping out. And so, to Jim's point, nothing more rewarding than being a Corps of Engineer employee on a 45 to 60-day mission down there, and you get to talk to a homeowner who's lost everything. I mean, it's powerful. And in some cases, we've been able to help those folks find mementos, right? So recently, there was I think a police officer whose father had served as a police officer, and we were to go in there with our contractors and find, I think it's the father's police badge, as an example. And so that, I think, it just really hits home. We've had folks from even in our division go to North Carolina to be part of that response mission. And I can tell you, they come back a better employee because they just really appreciate that fast-paced emergency response. It is instant feedback, helping their fellow citizens, right, in times of the need. We've also had folks go out to Maui, right, about the tragic Maui wildfires. We had plenty of folks from the South Pacific Division go over to Hawaii and serve there. And so, that's just extra special for us. And they learn that it's like being on a military operation. For those civilians that may not have been in the military and may not have been in deployment, but it is fast-paced, it's 7 days a week, it's long hours, But it is rewarding. And so I think, to Jim's point, we encourage that. We give those folks extra training, and they get extra certifications in some cases, and, they could be deployed in a moment's notice. I mean, it could be and those urban search and rescue folks, they could be recalled in, 12, 18 hours. Get on a plane, we need you to go here, do this. And so, just thanks, Jim, for that. That is extra special for us to be able to do that mission. Hopefully that hit him, Jim. Yeah.
But Jim, I have a question. On, like in the military, anything, there's always more things to do than you have capacity to do it. And then it always costs more than you have a budget for. So how do you set your priorities? And then, and I imagine every project is a little bit different, but then can you just generally talk about the funding, where that money comes from, whether
Sure.
it's federal, state, city?
Sure. So about 95% of our organization, I said